Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, September 15th at Squalin, Squamish. We are meeting tonight, as always, on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Motion to adopt the amended agenda, please, Council. This added the proclamation request from the Canadian Institute of Forestry and a letter from Dr. Mark Lecition for our consideration. Would you like to move that, Councillor Stoner? Thank you. Seconded by Councillor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. As always now, because we are meeting electronically, we need to pass Ministerial Order M192. And it notes that we're ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability at this meeting by the following means. This meeting is being live streamed. A video of this meeting will be available on the district's website for viewing on an on-demand basis. And the meeting is open to the public for electronic participation, and limited public attendance is available at Brennan Park Recreation Center. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Pettengill. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I do need to read our electronic meeting procedures. Council members attending the meeting electronically are required to advise the chair of the following circumstances. When a council member disconnects or reconnects, so that this can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Council members are to identify themselves when they advise the chair that they wish to be placed on the speakers list, either by raising their hand or by saying chair. With respect to a vote, council members only are required to state a nay vote. No statement is required. When the member is in favor, council members shall put their telephone or computer on mute unless they wish to speak. This applies to staff as well. Council members shall be involved in and participate in the meeting. If council members are having technical difficulties, please text our corporate officer. And if we are having technical difficulties on our side, we will recess the meeting for up to 10 minutes and get everyone connected again. Okay, so with that, are there any notice of motion, Council? Seeing none. We have two delegations this evening, or sorry, one delegation and a proclamation request, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the new Poet Laureate of Howe Secondary, Sophia Katramadakis, and I hope I said that correctly, Sophia, so you can correct me if I got it wrong. Sophia emailed me last week and shared her poem with me that starts out the school year for Howe Sound, and I was really moved and reached out to her and asked if she would come and speak with us tonight and present her poem herself, and so she is here this evening. So I turn the floor over to you, Sophia. Welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Are you able to hear me? I haven't used this before.
Yes, we can hear you just fine. Okay,
perfect. So I just prepared a quick little introduction to my video that I'll be presenting. So, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me to present my poem at this council meeting. I'm Sophia Katramadakis, and I'm a grade 12 student at Howe Secondary School. Over the summer, I was informed by the school's English department that I had been selected as the first student poet laureate. I enthusiastically accepted this position. As poet laureate, I feel like it is my role to encourage thought and exploration of ideas through poetry. We have a lot going on in the world right now, and I feel as though my voice as poet laureate to express my thought is an effective way to get youth thinking about current events. My first poem as poet laureate is entitled New Normal. It is one that I created and animated in hope of acknowledging some of the fears and anxiety youth might be experiencing while returning to school, especially in these uncertain times. I wrote the poem to let youth know that they are not alone in this time, and that their feelings are ones that many of us are processing. I hope that as poet laureate, I will inspire others to explore their feelings through this beautiful expression. Thank you so much for this honor of presenting my poem here tonight, and I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, Sophia, we're just going to play it now, and hold on a second, because I'm sure council will have some comments after we get to view it.
The term new normal, woven around the tapestry of society,
attempting to hold us safely, though loose threads hang like jungle vines. The term new normal, anything but a routine. Each day a new curve, swoop, spill, or spiral. The past year appearing like a Jackson Pollock collage. The term new normal weighs us down like heavy groceries, causing unwanted stress throughout our fragile veins, as if a child on their first day of school. We've all been there, you know, when your heart rate decides to rise like butterflies comprised of fear and angst, flying into the unknown reality of what we now consider normality, we feel unstable. Like a child walking for the first time, avoiding the falls so we crawl, a fear of standing tall so we stall in our own footprints. But it's normal. It all is. Every thought of dismay telling you to stay away from the mere thought of a new day, attempting to pray away the gray that seems to follow, but it's okay. Time will move forward, and the clarity of life will soon develop like a Polaroid picture, as if untangling a ball of loose threads, slowly unwinding like tightly braided hair. Every wave of uncertainty that tries to envelop your confidence like a blanket of doubt can be harnessed to propel you in the right direction, even though the mystery of times ahead may try and hold you captive like a prisoner. Just acknowledge that these feelings are new, but also normal.
Okay, I think everyone heard that perfectly this time. Council, reactions, thoughts, questions? I think it's so important right now that we hear from our youth. I think this pandemic has affected young people in so many different ways that older folks can't really understand. And so I'm so glad that you shared that with us, Sophia. And I'm just going to give council a chance to ask you a few questions if they'd like to. Anyone? Thoughts or reactions? Councilor Pettengill.
Yeah, I don't have a question. It is a very moving poem. I think I felt connected to the words. I think they apply not just to youth, but to probably a much wider range of people are feeling very much the same thing. And also when I mess around with music, I sometimes put that echo effect on purpose. And so I actually really kind of enjoyed that. I thought it added something. I enjoyed both versions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Pettengill. Councilor French.
Thank you. Yeah, I followed the link a few days ago, and quite frankly, to be honest, when I hit the link, I was thinking, oh, this is just going to be some high school art project. And it's so much more than that. It is the entire package. It's a great poem. It's a great animation. And I was pleasantly blown away by the artistic value that was in front of me when I watched it the other day. And I was just as entertained seeing it this evening. So well done, Sophia. Thank you very much for contributing to the arts in our community. And I wish you all the best as the Poet Laureate for the school year ahead. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Councilor Herford.
Thank you. I was very impressed with the not only with the poem, but with its presentation. And Sophia, as the first student poet laureate, what else can we expect throughout the year as you go? Do you have things planned out? Is it as inspiration strikes, or maybe a bit more about your role as it's new and we're not familiar with it?
Well, my main goal is to just encourage poetry throughout our school, to mentor younger people that want to go into writing or have the same passion for poetry that I do. My goal is also to do a poem a month. So I'm most likely going to do one for Remembrance Day, for Christmas, and just other big events that are happening in our world and around our school.
Well, thank you. I look forward to seeing what's next year. Obviously, very talented, and thank you so much for representing, I think, a lot of our thoughts with your art that you shared with us here today.
Thank you so much.
Councilor Ray.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophia. I really enjoyed that. And I have to admit, when I was at your age, I don't really think I appreciated poetry as much as you do. And certainly couldn't have done that. And it wasn't until much later in life that I actually started to appreciate some of the stuff that I was forced to learn back in English 12. But I think you got a bit of a head start on me in that respect. And I was also uh, really impressed with the graphics. I mean, is it one of the criteria for being the poet laureate? Do you have to be a graphic artist as well, or did somebody help you with that, or how did you do that?
I actually animated it on my phone with my finger. And each frame I did separately, and there was a total of 1,300 frames. So yeah, I drew each one on my little iPhone.
Well, you're way ahead of me in that department as well. So, but thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank
We
you.
just got Councillor Race to use a phone.
Can you do that with a rotary dial phone?
Not quite. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the mayor, Sophia, thank you so much for the presentation. And what an interesting idea to have a poet laureate at Howe Sound Secondary. One, I'm super excited that this is a new initiative at the high school, and I have to say what an amazing selection for the first installment. I think there are so many components of that poem that resonated very clearly with me, and I'm not even starting a new grade in school this year, but I think that those words that you captured around the new normal are ones I think weigh really heavily for lots of us, but it was really interesting to see it from your perspective, and the play on words that you had throughout the poem was just really, really touching to listen to. And I have to second with Councillor Race that the graphics were really unbelievable and amazing that you were able to do that all on your iPhone. I think I continue to be amazed by the level of work and quality that comes out of all of our students at the high school, and this is one showcase of that. So thank you so much for coming to present to us this evening.
Thank you.
Sophia, it's as my colleagues have said, I think now you've set the bar high for your first poem, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you as the year goes on. I wonder if you wanted to grant us permission to share this in our weekly newsletter with the community, because I think you've heard that it resonates with adults as much as it does with young people. And if you would like, we would be happy to distribute it on our weekly digital newsletter.
Yes, definitely. I would very much be into that idea.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good luck with your school year and adjusting to this new normal, and please keep in touch. We'll look forward to hearing from you throughout the year.
Definitely. I look forward to sharing my poems.
All right. Have a great evening. Thank you, Sophia.
You too. Thank you.
We are now going over to Brennan Park, where I see Stirling Angus is at the podium with a new chin accessory. Welcome, Stirling. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, that's a really, really hard act to follow. I heard it in this end here, and I have nothing as entertaining as that, so I'm going to try my best to tell you about my proclamation. Thank you very much, Mayor Elliott and Council, for allowing me to speak to you on regarding National Forestry Week, or I should say National Forest Week. It's about forest, not necessarily forestry. It's something that's been around for a long time. I've been engaged in one way or another for over 34 years with National Forest Week. It normally comes in September. Here in Squamish, locally we've often celebrated at Brennan Park. Myself, or especially Eric Anderson, has been a big promoter and supporter of it on a local level for many years. This year we don't have the Brackendale Fall Fair going on, so unfortunately we're not able to celebrate this year on it. It's a simple but effective gesture for Council to proclaim National Forest Week. Squamish is a forest community in many ways. I think it's appropriate and worthy for it to be proclaimed. So I've sent a rough draft of a resolution. I'm not sure exactly how this process works, so I'm a little awkward in presenting on it, but you had a rough draft of a proclamation sent out earlier. I'm not sure if you had a chance to review it or if you want me to go through it quickly.
Sure, why don't you go through it quickly?
Okay, as a draft, it's whereas BC forests and outdoor recreation sectors employ hundreds of thousands of British Columbians and family and community supporting jobs across the province. And whereas the District of Squamish has shown forest leadership through the Squamish Community Forest that supports the local economy with local level planning and decision making around forest management with consideration of multiple values, including watersheds, cultural values, recreation, community wildfire protection, viewscapes, education, harvesting and research opportunities. And whereas Canada's world-leading sustainable forest management practices ensure both healthy forests and a healthy future and contribute to the fight against climate change. And whereas the employment, recreation, and skills training opportunities provided in a healthy forest sector are vital for social development and meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous communities. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Karen Elliott, do hereby declare September 20th to 26th, 2020 as National Forestry Week in the District of Squamish.
Thank you, Mr. Stirling. Would someone like to put forward that the District of Squamish proclaim September 20th to 26th, 2020 as National Forest Week? That is moved by Councillor Pettengill, seconded by Councillor French. Any comments? Councillor Pettengill.
Yes, thank you. And actually, when I first saw this, I had some hesitation. There's a lobby group on the example letter that, from my experience, is not a pinnacle of sustainability and some of the things that we aspire to. So I did some research into what the Forestry Week was about, just to allay my concerns. And I see there is a lot of really good conversation, I understand, to the value that forests and forestry play in our communities, especially when it's well done. So that's why I sort of came to the conclusion that, I set that particular organization aside. The week itself, I think, makes a lot of sense to support. And so I want to support this and the part that forests and forestry play in our community.
Thank you, Councillor Pettengill. Other comments? Councillor French, then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. The forestry workers in our community tend to be a pretty quiet bunch. They just every day head out into the woods, do their work, and work hard. And it's nice to have an opportunity to recognize the industry and those who work in it by taking this opportunity and proclaiming National Forest Week. It's a sector that contributes significantly, not just to our economy here in Squamish, but to the entire provincial economy. And back in the 1990s, there was some pretty significant scaling back of our forestry practices, and I think we're more sustainable than ever in the way that we're harvesting our forests. And I absolutely support this declaration, and I support our neighbors who work in the forest industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson and Councillor.
Thank you. Well, the theme this year, Healthy Forests, Healthy Future. We can remind ourselves of the importance of forest management and the risks our forest landscape face with our smoky skies these days and the news of the situation south of the border, which could well be part of our circumstances here in BC. Forestry Week used to be a big ad revenue week for the local newspaper. And that's how we all kind of grew up around Forestry Week. That's where all these ads sprouted up about Smokey the Bear and looking after our forests, quarter-page ads and companies taking out full-page ads. But still today, there are activities still going on, as Stirling Angus has referred to. Just last week, a group of international forestry students were hosted here in Squamish by Squamish Forestry's Jeff Fisher and a few other folks. And hopefully next year, we can host our own Forestry Week programming in a Squamish community forest. So I'm very happy to see this come forward and that we can raise consciousness about healthy forests and healthy futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. This summer was different for a huge number of reasons, and for me, Squamish Days was a big left a big hole. And one of the pieces I really enjoy around that event is sort of reconnecting with the forestry roots of Squamish and celebrating that, and as well as at the Brackendale Fall Fair, which is another opportunity, and that comes up. So thank you so much for bringing this forward and keeping this front of mind in the community. And as Councillor Anderson alluded to, I look forward to being able to celebrate Squamish Community Forest maybe this time next year, as the process grinds its way ever forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much for bringing this forward, Stirling. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, councillors. It's all about forests, not just forestry. And this is just on Chris Pettigill's. This is a coming together of disparate ideas for celebrating forests and all its different realms, not just industrial forestry. But thank you for looking into that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, at this point in the agenda, we consider any unscheduled public attendance. So this would be a member of the public who feels they have an item that cannot wait 2 weeks until our next meeting. Not seeing anything from the moderator or from our moderator, Brennan Park, so we'll move on. We don't have public hearings tonight or scheduled items, so we're moving on to our bylaws. Item 9A1 is District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw, Amendment Bylaw 38108 Cleveland Avenue, number 2657, 2018.
Can everyone see and hear me? Right. And can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
All right, so good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Hamilton. I'm a planner with the Community Planning and Infrastructure Department, presenting to you today Bylaw 2657, 2018 for 38108 Cleveland Avenue for first and second reading council review. The rezoning is located at 3810 Cleveland Avenue and is proposing to rezone from the existing C2 vehicle fueling station site to a C4 downtown commercial. The property is surrounded by C4 properties with the exception of CD51, which is to the east, and it's known as the Mistral Building. The property falls under DPA 3 Universal Guidelines and DPA 5 Commercial Center. A rezoning application for this property was first submitted in 2017 under Bylaw 2524. The application was for a 6-story development with 41 residential units, and it proposed 40% employment space, a floor area ratio of 3.3, and significant parking variance. The application was presented to a committee of whole meeting, but did not proceed to any further council meetings, and the file was closed. Later that year, the C4 zone went under review, and a number of amendments were approved under Bylaw 2578. The regulation changes required 30% employment space for a building to achieve a 2.0 FAR, and included the addition of upper story stepbacks and regulation regarding maximum frontages. For comparison, this rezoning application is proposing a 5-story building with 28 residential units. It has an FAR of 2.0 with an employment space of 20%, and not all upper story setbacks are meeting the required regulation. So this rezoning application has had several zoning and design challenges along the review process, which has resulted in different design and massing orientations, as can be seen on the slide. The project was presented at an advisory design panel meeting in October of 2019 and a committee of the whole meeting in May of 2020 to receive more guidance on the project. To quickly summarize, ADP voiced concerns for the overall form and character of the building and expressed concern for massing of the building for this particular corner. ADP also voiced the need for more activation of the Loggers Lane frontage, to add larger amenity space to the development, and did not support commercial tandem parking, which was proposed at the time. ADP's recommendations on how to activate the corner included that it interacts with the building design, remains mostly public, and is activated by incorporating seating, greenery, and design elements reflective of Squamish. At the May 2020 Howe meeting, committee expressed support for staff's major concerns regarding the corner plaza, the low height of the 3-story parking garage, more activation of the Loggers Lane, and support for a hydro pad-mounted transformer PMT within the district's road right-of-way. Committee also expressed concern for the massing of the building and suggested to explore options to reduce the building's height. Committee also suggested applicant work with staff to design a better corner plaza area and explore reductions to employment space in order to reduce the overall massing. The revised design for first and second reading has incorporated all of the Howe and ADP recommendations. So the proposed building has now widened the upper building massing to sustain the 28 residential units it originally had proposed. It has reduced the employment space percentage to 20% and reduced the parking garage back to 2 stories. In return, the upper 6-story massing is reduced and now accommodates a larger indoor and outdoor amenity area. The development is still proposing an FAR of 2.0. So although the C4 zone requires 30% employment space to reach an FAR of 2.0, the employment space offered also includes 2 outdoor patio areas. Outdoor patio space is not technically calculated, and so if it was to be calculated, it would increase the employment space total to 27%. So given this information, staff believe the reduction in employment space is a reasonable compromise to reduce upper story massing and still maintain the developer's density objectives. As the employment space percentage does not comply to the C4 regulation, an exception for this particular property will need to be further added to this amendment bylaw in order for this property to rezone to C4. So this slide highlights the parking changes from ADP to Howe to the current design. The site is still vehicle accessed by 2 entrances off Loggers Lane, accessing now a 2-story parking garage. The parking garage clearances are roughly 3.7 meters at the ground floor and 3.1 meters at the second floor, where at Howe they were originally proposed at 2.1 meters, which was the initial concern. The project is meeting all parking regulations by providing all 28 residential parking stalls and 6 of the 11 required commercial parking stalls, with 5 cash in lieu. The project will need to seek a loading bay variance at development permit in order to minimize the street frontage interruptions and maximize ground floor activation on all 3 street frontages. So the site is adjacent to a prominent downtown corner at Winnipeg Street and Cleveland Avenue, and this intersection is highlighted as one of the prominent corner plaza sites in our official community plan and received design feedback at both ADP and at Howe. So in turn, staff have worked closely with internal staff, the applicant, their architect, and landscape architect on this project to design a corner plaza that meets the vision and needs of this prominent downtown intersection. So the major changes include the addition of a curb bulge. This decreases the width of the crosswalk and increases the corner plaza area, as you can see in the yellow area on this slide. The increase in the CRU ground floor setback beyond just the visibility corner, which is required in the zoning bylaw, also adds more streetscape space to this corner. This additional streetscape space allows for both seating and greenery to be provided on both sides of Cleveland sidewalk, creating an activated plaza feel. It also creates more space to include a patio area at the Loggers and Winnipeg intersection, which is highlighted by the purple area on this slide. Both areas include both open and covered seating spaces to support an activated streetscape in every season. Other changes include the addition of a 2nd-story commercial patio that overlooks the prominent intersection and further activates the streetscape from above. The design also includes a water feature to be incorporated into one of the seating areas, and the design would include a playful water jets, a bridge, and appropriate grading to ensure water is contained. The details of the initial design are preliminary and would be secured in detail at development permit. So moving on to massing, the development at Howe was proposing a 6-story building with a Cleveland Avenue upper story setback of 8.21 meters in compliance with the C4 upper story setback regulation. And as earlier mentioned, to reduce the 6-story massing and height of the building, the development in return increased in width, with the upper story setbacks now varying from 1.75 meters to 5.83 meters, as you can see on the slide. As you can see in the right-hand image, portions of the balconies, planters, and the 6th floor staircase now encroach into the required step-back regulation angle. A variance will be required at development permit to accommodate this design. At the rear of the building, the Loggers Lane entire massing is still stepped back from 3.71 meters due to a sanitary right-of-way. The building's residential upper stories with balconies are further stepped back due to the proximity of the BC hydro poles along the Loggers Lane frontage. However, the clearance area has been reduced slightly from 6.15 meters to 3.53 meters. The interior side of the development is still proposing to be built right to lot line, with the upper residential stories stepped back 1.52 meters. These upper story setbacks details have stayed relatively consistent since the Howe meeting, with changes mostly focused on massing regarding the parking garage and the ground floor commercial area. The conversion of the 2nd-story office building to parking allowed for more parking capacity on the 2nd floor, and therefore more room on the ground floor to expand the commercial area facing Loggers Lane. So to better understand massing, staff have asked for a viewscape analysis that shows current mountain viewscapes along with the previous proposed massing at Howe. This viewscape shows how the variance to step back on the upper stories along Cleveland Avenue do not hinder the view of Mount Garibaldi. Staff have asked for further viewscapes to confirm this from other angles and hope to provide this information to council at a later date. Generally, no major mountain viewscapes from these images were preserved by reducing the 6-story massing, as can be seen from this image here. That said, viewscape images taken from further away would likely see an impact from the reduction of height. Overall, the viewscape analysis shows that to preserve any further mountain views from this particular angles, the development would have to significantly reduce the building massing to a 3-story development. A 3-story building would result in a significant loss of FAR, rendering this particular project unfeasible for this applicant. Viewscape 3 visualizes the Winnipeg's. Oh, I've lost light. One moment. There we are. Just haven't moved. Viewscape 3 visualizes the Winnipeg Street stepback, displaying that some mountain viewscapes are slightly affected by widening the building, as the upper story stepback along Winnipeg went from 2.85 meters to 1.5 meters, slightly covering more of the mountain view looking west. Lastly, Viewscape 4 demonstrates the extent of the Chief Mountain Range, coverage with a slightly increase in the Chief Viewscape by reducing the 6-story massing. So the development is proposing a CAC in line with the current CAC policy under option B for multifamily residential or mixed use. The total of the contribution is $376,521. This contribution has increased slightly from the previous CAL proposal. This slide attempts to summarize some of the key policies this application is now all meeting, where at CAL, many of the corner plaza related policies, which are highlighted in red, were actually not met. So currently they are meeting all of those. For council priorities, this application is not proposing the C4 zone, required 30% of employment space. However, it is now proposing more ground floor retail space. The recent employment studies suggest that ground floor retail may be more in demand than office downtown, and thus of higher value at this prominent corner plaza, corner downtown. The addition of this corner plaza significantly enhances the public realm of this prominent downtown intersection and sets a really high public space precedent for future developments at this intersection. The project has not received any public comment at this time, and no public information meeting has been held. Staff will initiate public hearing notification should initial bylaw readings be given. So staff are recommending that that Council give first and second reading to the District of Squamish zoning bylaw amendment bylaw 2657 2018, and that a public hearing date be scheduled for October 20th, 2020. And alternatively, the Council's other recommendations are they could go for first reading of the bylaw 2657 2018, or Council could refer the application back to staff with providing a number of feedback. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Council, any questions? Yes, Councillor French, then Councillor Ray.
Yeah, I'm a little confused by some of the wording in the submission around whether this is a wood frame building above the concrete portion of the construction, or is it steel frame?
Through you, Mayor, that's a great question. We did notice that issue, and to clarify, is they're intending to create a prefabricated steel frame.
Okay. I also like to know if just applying lessons from other developments downtown, and I'm not sure if this is the point where decisions like this are tackled or if it's later in the process, but I'm worried about protecting the sidewalks during construction for Cleveland Avenue and Winnipeg. Will they be covered? Will they be protected? Will pedestrians be able to use those sidewalks during construction?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, we do have a plan through servicing agreement and engineering and building permit that our engineers and building inspectors are reviewing this to ensure that sidewalks remain open. That is our policy. However, sometimes there are some issues, but we do let applicants know early on to be including all of their construction on site as best as possible, and we have made some exceptions. Jonas wants to speak, probably better to answer that.
Go ahead, Mr. Valnius. You want to add to that?
Thank you. Just to add that we are, changing our practice around permissions for crews to work in the district streetscapes. So we're moving away from things like locating cranes on sidewalk and having the sidewalks closed for an extensive period of time. So that would be something that would be contrary to what people see today downtown. There's a lot of construction and quite a few of our sidewalks are closed. They will likely need to be closed for some period when the frontage is being redone.
And one more follow-up, if you'll allow me.
Go ahead, Councillor French.
I noticed that the graphics seem to indicate some pretty significant public art, and so I'm curious if there is public art commitment within their application, or is that just to make the graphics look good?
Through you, Mayor, there is a interest of providing public art. At this time, we don't know what that art looks like. It's usually done at development permit, but we are planning to secure some form of public art and an area in which we will be supporting that through this rezoning.
Great, thanks, Chair.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you. I had a question about the balcony on the second floor, and I went through the floor plans, and it wasn't clear from those plans. First of all, how you got to it. Or how somebody would get to it. And secondly, whether it was connected to a particular unit, either residential or commercial, is it part of a restaurant operation or something like that? Could you elaborate on that, please?
Through you, Mayor, the intention is for it to become connected to the ground floor. There is a staircase that connects from one of the ground floor units that will give access to that upper story patio or area. And the intention is for it to be kind of a patio area for a commercial tenant.
So for a restaurant service or something like that?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions, Council? Go ahead, Councillor Pangill.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a few, and actually just on that last one, a new one. Would they be required then or expected normally to have an elevator if thinking about accessibility and so on, if this is meant to be a commercial space for a restaurant or something?
Through you, Mayor, that's a good question. We don't typically go through the building permit side of things, probably at this early on. Our building departments do review these plans, but because they've been through so many different iterations, they may not have looked or caught that. I think that is something to explore and look at further. I'm not sure the exact regulation on the requirements of an elevator or not for access to that area.
Mr. Villeneuve?
Yes, so I'm pretty sure that the building code would require accessibility standards for commercial spaces in such a building. And in this case, the only way to achieve that would be through an elevator.
Maybe to further add, there is an elevator access to the second floor, but the access would have to be through the parking garage. So I don't know if that's a code component of that, but there would be elevator access to that space. I just don't know if it's a direct access.
Okay, thank you. There was a number of things that when I looked at the DPA 5 and DPA 3 guidelines, and to my assessment, didn't really seem consistent.
Councillor Pangill, we're only talking about zoning. The DP would come next if the zoning's successful. So I just am cautioning your line of questioning doesn't go too deep into DP area guidelines.
Okay, and that's why I want
to. Generally, these are initial drawings, and maybe Ms. Hamilton can correct me if I'm wrong, and more detail would come back at DP. So with that context, go ahead.
Okay, that's helpful. And that was part of my question. There are some things though that, and I think we spoke about last time in terms of, store frontages or frontages around Loggers Lane and so on, which I think are at this stage, which I haven't seen addressed yet. And so there are a few things like that, which I'm just not sure. It sounds like then we don't get that analysis until the DP stage, because frontages on loggers seems like something we would need to think about now.
So through you, Mayor, that's correct. We are not really looking at the details of form and character. I know this plan is presenting a lot of form and character up front, but we aren't getting into the itty-gritty details of that. What we are looking at is that does it meet the zone and the massing of that building, and kind of a preliminary look at what it could be. There is activation on the loggers frontage. It opens up through that whole corner, and they are currently proposing a patio space in that corner to activate it.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of the C4 zone, and I appreciate getting some of the history, but are we required to contemplate this in the context of C4, or might we, if there's pieces of this that weren't sitting right with us, might we conclude that C4 isn't appropriate here, or that maybe we feel there's still some challenges with C4?
It's a good question. Definitely, this is a rezoning. The discretion is fully on council. The current property is zoned C2. The applicants are proposing to zone it to C4. Our OCP policy supports the mixed of uses, which guides some of that direction to use C4, but council has the discretion to say no to the C4, or if C4 needs some adjustments.
Okay, thank you. If I can keep going, it did mention in the report that we had talked about building energy and emissions. I couldn't recall what the plan was on that. Can you remind me, and in particular, emissions as opposed to energy?
Maybe that last, I don't know if I can speak to emissions, but I can speak to the energy use that they're proposing at this time. Would that answer your question?
Sure, yeah.
So they are proposing to use all electric with the exception of their water heater. being gas. So that is the current proposal that's in their application.
Okay, thank you. I'm good for the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. Council, other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Stoner, and then Councillor Herford.
Thank you. Through the chair, my first question is just around the reduction in employment space, and I'm curious how that has affected the requirements for the number of parking stalls. So if we've gone from 30% employment space to 20% employment space, how much that enable them to reduce to that kind of 2 stories as opposed to 3 stories in their parking garage?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, that's a good question. So it might be easier, instead of looking at percentages, it might be easier to look at the actual area that they were proposing. So in the original application that we came forward with in Council at Howe, they were proposing 798 meters squared of commercial, which would have required 16 commercial stalls. And they were offering us 10 of those stalls, which meant a 6 stalls in cash and lieu. Now the current proposal is 538 meters, and that requirement would require them to have 11 CRU stalls, and they're currently proposing 6, so which is a cash in lieu of 5 stalls. So the difference really between 16 and 11 stalls is 5 stalls.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. I just had another question. Looking back at council comments at committee of the whole, there was a request that this should go to public information meeting prior to it coming back to council for readings. And I'm just curious why staff and/or the proponent chose not to advance it to public information meeting in advance of first and second reading.
Through Mayor, I think that was probably a miss on staff. I think that I didn't understand that communication. Maybe I was expecting it to happen before the public information meeting. But if that's how council feels, we can definitely go that route.
All right. Councillor Herford.
Thank you. The reduction in employment space and then sort of that alternate calculation, we'll call it, where we incorporate the exterior patio on the second floor. To me, it gets closer to the threshold with the creative math, I guess we'll call it, but it's still not over that line. And to me, if we were at slightly below, but when calculated outside space, it pushed us well over the line, then that's something I'm more interested in entertaining. So I'm curious if is this something, a practice that's been used in the past for these calculations, given that outdoor patio space is common in a building of this size?
Through you, Mayor, no, I don't think there's a lot of precedent for this. We are exploring patios and how they're being calculated more, as we've seen an increase in them and a need for them in Squamish. So we are trying to understand that value and to quantify it. We are, I've lost my train of thought on this, but
if I may, Carrie.
go ahead, sorry.
We're just also recognizing the fact that this is a fairly unique property from a development perspective. It has 3 frontages, and we do have some district infrastructure on the property on the Loggers Lane side, which which we need to establish a right-of-way for through redevelopment. So we're recognizing that there are some unique attributes about this property that are worth considering.
That's precisely what I was going to say. Just that there's a unique, because of the prominent corner, we thought the value of that public corner in this open kind of area was a value to support.
Another question, Councillor Friend?
Yes, thank you. And I do appreciate the site constraints with this property. That outdoor patio space on the second floor does feel like it would be a great place to spend some time, provided it had the appropriate rain and wind shelter and everything else it takes to have a usable patio space in Squamish. But it feels really disjointed from whatever that prospective tenant would be, by that flight of stairs or by an out and around to an elevator or back. It doesn't feel connected to me, which makes it feel like an afterthought in these particular plans. I'm not very excited about that aspect. But the outdoor space for the residents, is there outdoor amenity space that we're not speaking about here? I just want to make sure we're not double counting this as multiple things. I'm hoping.
Through you, Mayor, no, we're not double counting. They are meeting the amenity space, the indoor amenity space requirements, and we currently don't have an outdoor space amenity requirement, but they are proposing a significant amount of area on the 6th story. And to answer your other question just around the disjointedness and the afterthought of that patio space, one of the challenges with having no office on the 2nd story is that you have a parking garage directly facing the street. And so the idea was to maybe activate that space a bit more instead of having it just be a blank wall or a artistic siding or something like that, which is what you've been seeing in some of these other buildings.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race, and then I'll put myself on the list unless there's another councillor who hasn't spoken yet that has questions. Go ahead, Councillor Race.
Thank you. So I'm looking at page 15 of 209 in the report, which is figure 4, the corner plaza proposed design. And that shows the corner of Cleveland and Winnipeg, the bump outs for sort of a feature effect. And I'm just curious about that because those bump outs I'm assuming are built on road right of way. And so the lot line, that would be a 0 lot line on the front and on the side, would it not, for the building? And so the sidewalk and the bump outs, are we committed to this bump out, or is that just something that we think might be a good idea? Or can you explain the origin of that?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. So curb bumps, we're seeing more and more of them happen in our downtown. And the idea of them is to decrease the length of crosswalks and to create more space for pedestrians on the streetscape in our right-of-ways. This particular corner also has a transit stop, so we had to work with internal staff around the design to ensure that we are still keeping the transit stop and not impacting any street parking, all of those details. And what we found is that the bus can still maneuver in and we can still keep this curb bulge out. It doesn't impact parking, and it actually creates more space to meet the OCP intentions of a corner plaza area.
Thank you. And if I can continue, and there's a blue box shown at the corner of Loggers and in Winnipeg. I take it that's the hydro vault that we've been talking about, and so it's kind of landscaped around that.
Through you, Mayor, yes, correct.
Thank you.
That's good. Ms. Hamilton, a little bit about the C4 zone. So it requires off-street loading, and your report says that it would need to be a variance at DP, but where are they thinking that it will happen then? Because we're trying to create this really vibrant streetscape and we have a bus stop there, and so where would it go?
So the concept is to vary it at development permit so that they don't have a loading bay. If we can look at the streetscape and create loading bay areas, we are trying to do that collectively in our downtown to try to find appropriate spaces where multiple businesses can use on-street loading instead of having every single business have a loading bay in itself. That's the kind of the direction we're trying to move in with this, because our loading bay regulations are hindering a lot of it's a hinder to a lot of the other aspects of development that we're also trying to achieve, which is ground floor commercial space, parking, and activation of a streetscape.
I think about the challenges, three frontages. Loggers is our truck route. Winnipeg is quite a short street, and then you've got a bus stop, which you wouldn't want to fill with a vehicle. So I think it's really important to think about that is a sort of central plaza area is designated in our OCP. And so where is that shared loading space? And so I think that's something that is of concern to me. Also in your report, it says that it meets the OCP guidelines of 20% of the dwellings are 3-bedroom units. And I recognize that plans can be preliminary at this point, but I didn't see any 3-bedroom units in the floor plans provided to us. And I would imagine that a pro forma is based on what kind of units you think you can sell. So do you have plans that show 3-bedroom and how many? Because that's not what I see in the plans provided in the package that council received.
Yeah, that might have been a change that happened through the multiple different iterations of this that may have been missed. They've made multiple changes to these different units to make this work. So I can definitely recheck that.
Okay. They're applying for C4 zoning, and clearly staff have worked hard with the proponent to figure out how we build a building on this site that meets some or most of the C4 criteria, while also scaling back the massing to protect the viewscape. If this is rezoned to C4 and then its ownership changes hands, does that allow the next owner to go right up to, do we have to see another 6-story proposal here and go through the whole process, or will you capture some of these limitations in the regulation or in the zoning for this lot, which doesn't really then make it C4?
Yeah, it's a great question because there's challenges of going both routes. We can create a brand new CD zone and be very direct with all of the different changes. What we're trying to do is not create multiple different zones and try to have it conform to the C4, with the one exception of the employment space and with variances as that happen later. What we are proposing to do, though, is do a land development agreement, and we can highlight the different concern pieces or the pieces that we want to ensure are being developed at development permit, and ensure that they're done at DP.
Okay. I have another question, but it escapes me at the moment. So I'll go. I think I saw Councillor Pettengill. I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple more questions. Just following on from the mayor's comments, can someone explain why the employment piece would be covered in an amendment, which is not a general amendment to the C4 zone? It's just attached to this particular property. Then the other things are proposed as future variances, like why we wouldn't do all these things one way or the other.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, that's a good question. So employment space is use, and use cannot be varied. And so, and it also is attached to the FAR, which is density, which also cannot be varied. So this is a requirement to have this in if we want to support this as C4 as it's currently designed. We would need to have that amendment in the bylaw and have a unique amendment for this particular property to accommodate that as part of the rezoning process, where these other things like loading bays and step backs, they can be addressed as a variance later down the process. We can go a route, if you prefer, that we create a whole bunch of specific amendments for this particular property in the C4 zone, but then now you have different properties and amendments in the C4 zone, and it kind of gets it a little messy. So ideally, the route is to go for variances when they're allowed.
Okay, thank you for now just understanding why. Now you mentioned the sort of patio or frontage area would be the activation along Loggers Lane, but as I understand it, or unless I'm misunderstanding the drawings, that's actually primarily along Winnipeg. It might catch the one corner of Loggers, but as far as I see, Loggers is still primarily a 2-story wall, or am I misreading the plans?
I wonder if I can share my screen again. Is that helpful?
Yep, we can give you that permission. Go ahead.
So if we go back to this, this drawing here, so can you see my arrow on the screen? Okay, so this is the logger's frontage. So this would also be open. You can see there's glazing proposed in this little image here. So this would be open to loggers, and then the patio would actually extend all the way to that staircase door. So at this, there are challenges, a site with 3 frontages. From staff's perspective, this is as much, I think, activation as we're probably going to achieve on the slogger side, given that they need 2 entrances for their parking garage. And they do need an exit and garbage and all of these other accesses.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think I was partly misunderstanding the diagrams. I think the last question then, I think for staff, is just understanding how we're thinking about massing versus height. I guess in my mind, dropping 1 story didn't actually necessarily get at massing, especially when we sort of cut back some of the step backs. For me, the step backs was really important to the massing. I guess in my own mind, I think, a couple 7-story towers or something narrow, even though it's taller, could still reduce the massing. And in particular, when we're thinking about viewscapes in relation to mountain views, having that ability to break things up. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about massing. And so when I look at this, my reaction was there's actually a lot more massing than there was, even though the height is dropped a story. And I'm just wondering to hear staff's perspective on how you're thinking about massing and if we're thinking the same way.
Through you, Mayor, I think it's a good point. I think there's a lot of challenges with this property and this application because the applicant is trying to achieve an FAR of 2.0, which basically limits the ability. You're kind of moving around pieces, but the ultimate goal is to achieve a 2.0 massing for this particular applicant. So there's only so many different ways in which you can move that massing on this particular site. We showed council at Howe something that was taller and a little bit more narrower. And then in this particular example, it's reduced that height, but it has gotten wider. There's also moving around those pieces. If you wanted more employment space, it would mean a reduction in residential area for the applicant in order to achieve that 2.0. And it probably also would require more reduction in parking to make that work too. So there's all these different pieces that are in play to kind of create the massing that's here. Staff's understood the direction to kind of explore reducing the massing in a form of a height. And so that's kind of where we went with this. But if you have any further direction, we're open to this now, first and second reading.
Okay, and can I just ask one final question? When you mentioned the 2.0 FAR and that the applicant is trying to achieve that, I guess our C4 allows that. Is that something that we are hoping to achieve as a municipality, or it's something we will allow if all the conditions are met in general?
Well, through you, Mayor, again, this is fully at council's discretion. This is a rezoning. The C4 zone does allow for 2.0, but with 30% employment space. So to probably see that, you would see a reduction in residential area in order to achieve that.
I think too, Ms. Hamilton, there's the table in the C4 zone that shows proponents that they can achieve a higher FAR the more employment space they provide. So I believe this is a medium-sized parcel, is it not?
That is correct.
So this proponent could actually go up to 2.75 FAR if they provided 100% employment, or they can achieve 25% employment at 1.75 FAR. So
correct.
There's that table to guide you, Councillor Pettengill, that's in the zoning bylaw. Councillor Stoner.
Councillor Pettengill asked the question I was going to ask, so thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? I remembered what I wanted to ask. So in your report, Ms. Hamilton, you talk about developing a vibrant, active, and inclusive public realm, distinct urban character, high-quality urban design. And I think with this move, we're sort of looking at designating this intersection as a major downtown public plaza. Now, I'm not sure that we have the design we need or that we would like in front of us, but I wonder if staff has spent some time thinking about or considering all four corners of that plaza. So if we have four developments who imagine four plaza corners, we're going to end up with something quite disjointed. And I wonder if there is some benefit in actually us looking at what we want to achieve at that intersection. You know, 13.3C says provide a focal point and identity for each neighborhood, that it's a distinct urban character, high quality urban design. How do we achieve that when we might have four different proponents building and designing four corners?
So staff have we do have a regulation in our subdivision development control bylaw that speaks to a cohesive Cleveland design. And that includes like paving material and street trees and lights, a lot of those details. And staff are currently working on streetscape guidelines for the district for downtown, not just on Cleveland Avenue. And it is supposed to tackle these corner plazas, which are fairly new in our OCP, and which we haven't really, this is probably our first major application that's looking at one of the major corners, other than the Main Street plaza area where that's shut off, where they've closed down that street. So we are trying to, we did work internally with staff to explore that, and the intention is that what we do here, minus the transit stop, would probably be replicated on the other side. So a curb bulge, it would probably accommodate parking instead of a transit stop, and that we would have a similar amount of area. The building design may be a bit differently, and how the building interacts with that corner, as that's really unique to the particular building and the particular property. But in terms of the streetscape details and consistency with seating design, lighting, trees, planting, staff are working on that, and we do have an initiative to create cohesiveness.
I think my concern is that when I think about a plaza, I think about that at some point the road is closed for a special event, and it is truly a plaza, and it's not just about seating and the types of plants, but how we've created a public gathering space that includes all four corners, and we could use it as a gathering, a really important gathering space. So I don't think that's up to this proponent necessarily, but I also don't want us to miss the opportunity to think about this as a place where we would close roads and have a celebration, or make it part of a celebration, and be creative or even aggressive in trying to create an iconic sort of sense at that corner. It's one of the best views to the north up to Enchikai, and it would just be a shame to not meet that goal of a high quality urban design authentic to Squamish. So I don't know how that works into this rezoning, but it's certainly one of the concerns that I have about under designing it or not thinking ahead to this whole area.
I think that there's concerns with doing this piecemeal, and I think you've raised those, where you have one developer doing one corner, another developer doing another. I think if we wanted to do something cohesive, the district would probably have to take the initiative and lead on that. Just because we don't even know timelines, we could build a portion of it with one development, and then the other portion wouldn't be developed until that developer or that property develops. So I think if we do want to, if that's the ultimate goal for like a cohesive intersection corner, I think that's something that the district would have to probably take on as a project.
Okay, the last thing I just wanted to check with the preliminary drawings is that we've got a maximum frontage in the C4 zone and 16 meters. And does this meet all that? I haven't measured out the building, but it looks like sort of a very large frontage on Cleveland. I just want to make sure that that concept is in the proponent's mind.
Could you clarify what you mean by maximum frontage? Oh, the 16 meters?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is been looked at, and the way that that's been designed because of the residential entrance, and there is some separation between the two that that is kind of, they've designed the inside for that. Obviously, the outside will be looked at development permit.
Okay. Have we been successful in any other building of achieving office on the second floor? When there's a mixed use, so retail, office, residential above?
Can you re-say that, sorry?
We updated the C4 zone a few years ago, and the view was to try and achieve retail on the ground floor, office on the second floor, and then residential above that. And I'm just wondering if we've been able to achieve that with any of the C4 buildings that have come forward.
Yeah, so Jonas, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe we have seen this done with the new regulation off of Cleveland Avenue, but this would be the first one rezoning on Cleveland Avenue that we're exploring right now. So with this new regulation. So this particular, and C4 on Cleveland has different regulation than C4 on 2nd or 3rd Avenue or the other streets downtown. So I think this is new, and there's not a precedent for this yet.
I've forgotten that. What is the difference between C4 on Cleveland and C4 elsewhere?
Yeah, so C4 elsewhere requires 20% employment space. We don't have any step back regulation, which is that angle off the sidewalk, which is kind of reduce the massing from the street. And we don't have the 16-meter frontage requirement, which is to try to make that small scale feel on Cleveland Avenue. So with Cleveland Avenue has different requirements and with FARs. So this C4 on Cleveland Avenue has a table that tells you how much density you can have in relation to your employment space. And it varies from 25% to 30%. Or yeah, and it offers 100% employment as well as an option.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Carrie is correct that we haven't seen very much redevelopment yet on Cleveland Avenue. We have a few projects that are proposing to put office, one on Cleveland, I believe in Pac West, but it's a much larger property, so it's hard to compare the two. And then we have a few that are off of Cleveland on 2nd Avenue. And I believe Amaji is putting in some office space on their 2nd floor, but that's also on 2nd Avenue. So we haven't seen much development on Cleveland at this point.
Thank you. Any other questions, Council? Councilor Herford.
Thank you. I'm contemplating I'm looping back to the outdoor patio space being scored as employment space, and I'm comfortable with being generous with the calculation given various calculations given the site constraints, but I don't accept that it's a square foot of outside space is equal to a square foot of inside space. If we calculate that as maybe they're worth half as much from an employment standpoint, or something like that. That's math that I could entertain, and I would love to see. I'd love to see a project work with that office on the 2nd floor, and how do we get there, and whether that's an adjustment to this overall zone, whether that be through a parking requirement or I don't know what other levers we have. I'm interested in doing that. I think that's the that's what I would like to see in the end, and I think that's what the zone's attempting to accomplish. And it's a bit frustrating when we can't get there on a fairly sizable piece of property. And I appreciate the some of the creative solutions, and I would like to be generous with the in an area or two where because of the site constraints. But I feel as it sits now, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around all the sort of missing the mark on more than one spot. So anyways, I'll leave it there. But my main point, because I ramble and I'm sorry for that for everybody, is that outdoor space is fine to calculate it, because I do think that it's more valuable than zero, but it's certainly not worth the same as the inside space. So I don't accept that calculation.
Thank you. I don't want to get too deep into comments before we have a motion on the floor, but are there any other questions or ponderings before I ask for a motion? Councillor Stoner?
I just want to clarify one last time that the floor area ratio for C4 off of Cleveland is 2.0 typically, correct? That's the allowable density. And then it's just along Cleveland where it varies as per that table in the C4 zoning.
Just to be very clear, Jonas, do you have a zoning bylaw in front of you that you can pull this out?
Yes, I do. Just
So
a second.
Yeah, so there's multiple different FARs that you can achieve on Cleveland Avenue under the C4 zone. And I'll just get Jonas to read those out to you.
I'm sorry, I'm asking for clarification on the rest of the C4 zone away from Cleveland Avenue.
The rest of the C4 zone away from Cleveland Avenue is 20%, and there is no FAR calculation. There's a maximum in our OCP, which is 3 FAR, but that only gets triggered if there's a rezoning for the property.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Ms. Hamilton, the recommended motion is first and second reading and going to a public hearing. The alternatives are first reading or a referral back to staff. So I think for council, it's up in the air. Councilor Pettingill.
I would try a referral back to staff. I'll speak to it if I get a seconder.
I don't see a seconder at this point. Councilor Pettingill, Councilor Herford.
I'll second it for discussion.
All right, now you do. Councilor Pettingill.
Yeah, for me, there's just a lot of pieces missing, and I don't know if we need some more discussion or clarity. I think I spoke to the ones that, for me, that the massing is, if anything, probably worse, not better. I think, you know, we've heard a lot from the community of concern, especially downtown, in relation to the viewscapes and massing, that I think this just hasn't addressed that. I think as we deal with the climate crisis, maintaining that employment space in relation to residential space is absolutely critical. So I'm not comfortable going lower on the employment space. And I think those are two of the big ones for me. And for me, those are pretty big. But I think there's lots of other comments that have been raised that are worth some work before we take this too much further. You know, I think there are some interesting things we've seen with this proposal, and I think we could see a great project there. But I think, you know, and I would like some of that public feedback to have that public presentation and hear what the public thinks. Not a public hearing, but I can't remember the developer showcase or what the term is.
Public information meeting.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, that's why I think we should do a bit more of that work first.
Anybody else want to speak to this motion? Councilor Race.
You're on mute, Councilor Race.
Thank you. Sorry. I am not going to support this motion. I think and I acknowledge that the developer has made some significant changes to this since our committee of the whole meeting. And generally speaking, I like them. There may be a few minor things to do, but I have maybe a different view of it. I was the one that suggested getting rid of that floor of office space to reduce the massing. And I was quite pleased to see when I got the report that it was incorporated. And I did that, and I think it's okay for this one lot because it's a corner lot, and the corner lots have, I think, constraints that other lots in the middle of the block would not necessarily have. And I certainly wasn't proposing it, and I don't think it is proposed for all of the C4, but I think we have to recognize this property has some significant constraints. One is the viewscapes down Winnipeg, and these corner lots and side streets have always been identified going back to before I was on council as avenues for views, and so the buildings had to kind of come back a little bit from them and not overpower them. And I think that's part of what this is. And that's why just reducing the massing, even reducing it a floor, kind of takes some of the bulk away from that side street. So I would not want to see it necessarily go back to staff. I think my alternative, which is not in this motion, would be to give it first reading. There are a few little things I think we can deal with before second reading, but I don't think it has to go back to that. I think we have to recognize, first of all, the district trespass at the back, which causes some constraints. There are some compromises here, there's no question, but I think this is an appropriate site for compromise if we can get it right. So I don't think going back to staff is the answer at this point.
Councillor Anderson and Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'm in alignment with Councillor Race on this. I would also not be sending it back to staff. It seems to me generally that a lot of work has been done on a long list of issues, and I'm generally happy with the outcomes, and in particular with the height and massing changes. For me, it is not so much the massing and height at this point in where we're at, but rather the facade finish and urban milieu aspects. And I'm not sure where to go on this or what the process may be, because I don't think that we have anything that's I would call banal at all. I think it's a quality effort at this time. I would love to see a little bit more of a wow factor at this location, but that again is speaking to facade issues, urban milieu issues. I do not see the need to return or to take new directions on the height and the massing, and I'm happy with the choices that have been made on those key issues.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I think I've spoken previously in this meeting to the challenges of the site and the generous sort of calculations required to get it over to meet the percentages of employment space and so on. And I do think that we're missing that this project's missing the mark at this point. Whether those changes can be made if we give this first reading, or if it needs to go back to staff. I think that the changes are substantial enough that it would need to go back to staff at this point. So I will be supporting sending this back to staff, and I would like to see it meet the requirements of the zone.
Councillor Stoner and then Councillor French.
Thank you, through the mayor. I will not be supporting the motion to send this back to staff. Although I do have some hesitations with where it is going. I do think a lot of work has gone into this proposal, as my fellow council colleagues have said. And I do think that we could give enough direction through comments that I would support it going at least to first reading. One piece in particular that I did pick up from our previous council committee of the whole notes was this request for it to go to public information before it coming back. So I would, if this motion is defeated, support it going to first reading with some requirements to be completed before it comes back for second. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor French.
Thank you. I think this is a classic case of the initial proposal that came to us was less than great and has evolved significantly to a project that I think is worthy of first reading. So I won't be supporting sending this back to staff, and I do like the idea of allowing it to go forward for first reading with our comments noted. Thanks.
Thank you. I think this should go forward for first reading, so I won't be supporting this motion. But I do think there are some issues that need to be addressed, and perhaps I will speak to those if there's another motion put on the floor. So I will call the question on this motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? Mayor Elliott, Councillor Race, Councillor Stoner, Councillor French, Councillor Anderson. Opposed? Motion fails. So I would like to move forward. So we need another motion on the floor, please, so that we can deal with this application. Councillor Race.
Thank you. I'll move first reading. But I'm just not exactly clear how we want to capture the comments, whether we want to try to put them in the motion or whether as a second paragraph in the motion, that staff be directed to take into account council's comments at this meeting. And leave it at that. There is a record of it. The staff have been taking notes. So
there's certainly a record. I think the only one that is worth considering is the public information meeting. Those were comments that came out of the committee of the whole that it wasn't done. Otherwise, I think council should just state their support or non-support for some of the issues with this development, and then the developer with staff can decide how it comes back for second reading. So I'd rather not list everything out. I would just allow council to make their comments.
Okay, then I'll just move first reading.
Seconded by Councillor Stoner. Would you like to speak to it again, Councillor Race?
Well, I will. I'll try not to repeat myself. You know, I talked about the massing, and I was generally okay. I mean, just a couple of the issues that have popped up, and I'm generally okay with the bump outs, even though they're on district property. I think the difference is that the developer pays for them and we get them, uses our land, but it gets to our landscaping and our aesthetic requirements. But I take the point that we need to have some coordination and a plan for all four corners to work towards. And ultimately, as those properties develop, the developer will pay for them and will inherit them. I'm okay with all the bump outs on Winnipeg, partly to accommodate that that hydro vault that has to go somewhere, and also because some years ago I was a councillor that thought that we should actually close Winnipeg and turn it into a kind of a pedestrian mall. So as far as I'm concerned, we can bump out all we want on Winnipeg and just do what we want there. I don't have a concern with the second floor patio and the commercial. As I stated earlier, it was I was happy to suggest that for this particular property, we not try to get office there as a way of reducing massing and opening up the intersection a little bit. And whether we count the patio or not, to me seems actually not relevant, because I think what we have to agree to if we want to see this proceed in this more or less this form is that there won't be second floor commercial space. There will be ground floor commercial space, and we will just vary it as we have to allow that to happen. And whether we include the patio in there or not to change the fraction, to me just doesn't seem relevant. But I have been to a lot of restaurants. I was starting to think about it, where there has been the kitchen on one floor and the main dining area on one floor, and then the patio or upstairs. And the whole thing is serviced by sort of a dumbwaiter system, and they work just fine. And it's great being on the second floor or the upper floor sometimes. So that can make sense to me. So I think it is it's valuable commercial space, or it could be certainly, and it will add a lot of, I think, a lot of life to that corner if we do have that kind of a scenario. So I'm happy to support first reading. I think there have been other comments from my fellow councillors, so I can see some changes possible, but not significant, frankly, in my perspective. I think some changes between first and second reading to allow this to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner, do you want to speak to this motion?
Yeah, thank you. Through the mayor, I will support first reading. I think that it has come a long way since we saw it at committee of the whole. My biggest hesitation was following up on that particular piece from council comments in committee of the whole that this should go to public information meeting. I do think that as we are trying to make this into a core plaza for the downtown, that getting public input sooner rather than later into this process is really important. And I take the mayor's previous comments around the importance of trying to give that some due diligence and thought around how the four corners will start to interact. I personally really like the bump outs and the bulges. I think that helps start to create more space for people and less space, less perceived space, at least for vehicles, which I think is appropriate for our main street downtown. In terms of other points of hesitation, I do really like the direction that they've gone with the second story patio, but I do have concerns around the connection and the flexibility and functionality of tying that back to the ground level retail. And so some further detail and thought into that would be helpful if and when it comes back. And then my last piece of hesitation here is I do think that it has come a long way on the massing, but this concerted effort to try and stick to the 2.0 FAR with the reduction in employment, not seeing any built affordable housing attached, as well as no leadership on the green building aspect, I think is somewhere where the proposal does fall short for me. So I'll just leave that on the table for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, just first a clarifying question for the mover. Are you including the requirement for the public information meeting in your motion?
Through the mayor, no, it was not part of the motion. It was just first reading, period. I took the mayor's comments to be that it wasn't necessary.
Okay, thank you. I will stand down for a minute. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
I'll just make one brief comment on the green building topic. We have here a construction firm, a design construction firm that has substantial experience in offsite construction of multi-story buildings in Edmonton, in particular, I believe. They're using a steel frame and prefabricated panels, and I'm looking forward to a quick construction period. And I believe that that should be considered to be a very important aspect of green building, and that once we do an overall look at a ledger sheet with green building attributes of this project, that should feature prominently. I hope so, and I hope that we can learn from this project, if that is what they will deliver, that will set some example, set some new goals for construction turnaround for larger projects in the downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill.
Yes, thank you. So after a bit of thought, I will support this despite my previous motion. I do have some concerns, which I will just reiterate. I feel that first reading is a reasonable compromise. I'm just not wanting to go too far before something is ready, but I can live with first reading. As I stated, I think the employment to residential ratio, that's critical, and I think we need to hit that. For me, the massing and step backs on, I think, all sides is important. For me, my initial reaction when I saw this is that it's much more of an obstruction than it was before. I am not set on hitting a 2.0 FAR. I have no problem if we can find a good design that does that, but hitting that numbers is not particularly a priority. As Councillor Stoner said, I think the energy piece, there's still a fair bit of room to go there in terms of the water heat. And I understand we are not at the sort of the more aesthetic phase of this, but my reaction to everything that was proposed, and to some degree to the previous one, but even more with this, it felt more at home on West Georgia for me, in terms of, you know, what people were thinking. And I'm not an architect, so I want to be cautious, but that together with how long this process has gone on for this developer, I do have some concerns about whether we're communicating, whether we're hearing each other. Is the breakdown on our side or their side, or a bit of both? And I don't quite know what the answer is, but for me, there's a bit of discomfort there that somehow we're not connecting on what we want. And maybe it's an issue with the C4, I'm not sure. And that ties into my last point, where for me, you know, I can sympathize when a lot of work is being done, but what's important to me is that, is it close enough to where we need it to be, regardless of how much work is being done? And when it comes to approval, I'm not going to give a lot of credit for a lot of work being done. It needs to be the right design for the time. But I look forward to seeing where this goes next.
Thank you, Councillor Pettengill. Any other comments? Yep, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'll support this this motion. And my intent with the referral back to staff was to continue to work on this project. And I do feel this project needs work. I personally am not convinced that we should be giving away the employment space to get more people into our downtown. For a large number of reasons, the local employment space is extremely important. And I would be very open to discussing what it would take to make that happen at this site. So far, making the development happen on this site has come at the cost of employment space, and that's not a sacrifice that I'm excited about contemplating. So I'm going to reluctantly support first reading, and I expect some changes by the time we see this again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before I add mine? Okay. I will support first reading. I think this site has been challenging because of the hydro box, and because of the right-of-way that's sitting on the Loggers Lane side that is ours. But this is a rezoning from C2 to C4, and this is our only opportunity to get it right. And so I think just giving it first reading makes sense, because some of the details were missing for me this evening. I recognize the floor plans have changed all the time, and floor plans often come with DP, but I think to see that it meets our OCP guidelines of 30%, 3-bedroom units, I think just that kind of detail can't be missed. I think we have to understand the interplay between the first floor retail and what would be contemplated on the second floor. So it's not okay to pretend that maybe it's an elevator through the parkade. Like, if we're rezoning this, it all has to make sense, because I don't want to find out at DP that, oh, that didn't work, so now you don't get the second floor patio. You're just going to get some greenery to cover up the parkade. So that needs more thought. The C4 zoning was changed a few years ago to provide some flexibility so that we would get a varied streetscape and not all the buildings would be the same height. But we're also trying to match jobs to people, and that's a key pillar of our strategic plan. So the deal on Cleveland is that if you want an FAR of 2.0, you provide 30% of employment space. And I don't see that. And I see that it's easy to keep the residential and get rid of the office space, but I'm not sure that's in the long-term best interest of our community. So I think that's why more thought needs to be given to that second floor frontage on Cleveland about how that is actually employment space, how that becomes closer to the 30% that we're looking for in this zone. I will concur with my colleague, Councillor Anderson. There's a lack of a wow factor here, and I realize that you would want to capture wow factor most certainly at development permit, but This is an iconic corner. It will be part of what we want to be a very valuable central plaza in our downtown. And for me, this building doesn't quite yet pick up on something that is Squamish. Either its massing doesn't reflect a part of our history, or the lines in our community in terms of the mountains or the water. There's just something that makes it very urban, but not very Squamish. And I recognize these are preliminary drawings, but I struggle with that part of this. This is a really important corner. This is a C2 to C4 rezoning, so we have to get it right. And I think that's why this was referred to a public information meeting out of committee of the whole, is to try and get some of that community feedback, a sense of how the community sees this corner. I don't object to Councillor Pettingill's suggestion that part of this building could be skinnier and taller to reduce the massing, but I think, yeah, just something about its look and feel is not quite right yet for this corner. But I think it's worked. The proponents worked hard. We've got it certainly to a better place, and there's something to build on here. So I will support first reading. Is there any other hands? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Council, we've been sitting for a long time, so I would like to recess until 8 o'clock, please. Give everyone a chance to stretch their legs. We're back in our special business meeting. So we are on item 9B1, District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw, Amendment Bylaw for 39319 Falcon Crescent, number 2706-2019. That this be given third reading, and prior to adoption, the following items are to be completed, and they are listed on the agenda. Section 219 Covenant, and securing the applicant's proposed cash in lieu voluntary community amenity contribution. I will move third reading. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stoner. I'll move the whole motion, actually, just so that you're aware, Councillor Stoner, with all the conditions. All right. I understand that some folks are concerned about childcare in residential communities, but I also believe that zonings evolve and change over time, and they're not to be static. I think I've had enough parents in my office at Mayor's Drop-In desperate for childcare, in tears, because they can't find childcare. And I think in considering all the comments from the public hearings on this, that these applicants have considered their neighbors to the best of their ability. They are prioritizing children in their neighborhood so that they can walk or bike there with their parents. And it's just a reality that we have to provide more childcare, 72 spaces per year for 10 years, just to hit sort of a bare minimum. And so I think that this change in zoning both allows for the childcare, but preserves the ability for that house to be returned to its residential use should this use discontinue. And I think that that is a good compromise. I appreciate the folks that spoke at the public hearing, but I believe that this is a suitable use in this location, and I'm happy to support third reading. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I too will be supporting third reading. And there's no doubt that there was lots of comments that we received both in writing in advance of the hearing, as well as those who called in and participated through Brennan Park as well. I think one of the biggest things to me was the recognition that the zoning for this area was given in 2008. And the reality is our community has changed substantially between then and now. Although this was originally planned as a master plan single family subdivision, the realities of our community have really shifted. And I think that this proposal for rezoning does a really good job of still maintaining the character of that build as a single family home from the outside. But it does provide a little bit more flexibility in use for childcare, which we know is such a desperate need in our community. And we are zoning for that new use. And I think one of the other things I heard through the public hearing is concern around how that use might change over time, or if this sets precedent. The additions that we have in the new zone are really clear that this is for a max of 24 children, that it is only for childcare use and no other sort of commercial use. And I think both the staff report as well as council comments that I have heard to date really help to clarify that the rationale for enabling that use in this area is really driven by our childcare strategy and that recognition that we need those childcare units in order for our community to continue to thrive. To me, this is an equity issue. It is an economic issue. And I think that this is a reasonable solution to try and get more childcare spaces within our community. And the proponent has done, I think, everything in their power to address a lot of the potential or perceived concerns within the community around vehicle safety. We know that we have an issue with folks who drive too quickly, but that is not unique to this community. That is across our entire community, and we're doing additional policy work to pilot reduced speed limits throughout different parts of our community to try and address that issue with speed more holistically through our community. I'm also believe strongly in our business licensing process as a mechanism for enforcement. And there were concerns that were raised around how the requirements would actually be enforced. And I think that, like many other businesses, that's done through our business licensing, and I was satisfied with staff's response on that. So I'm happy to support third reading, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. Councillor Race and Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. First of all, I just wanted to respond to some of the comments at the public hearing. This is a land use proposal, and it's not about the operators personally. There were comments favoring the operators or favorable to the operators, actually from both sides of this issue. They were well spoken of, but when we're zoning like this, we have to zone for the possibility of a series of operators over time. We're zoning for an indefinite period. A couple of examples were given in the presentation of other daycares in neighborhoods. One is Fresh Air, which is located at Maple Crescent in Judd. That's a very large lot. In fact, it's the equivalent, because we also zoned it for this, the equivalent of 6 regular-sized single-family lots, and it's in a relatively large lot neighborhood. It's also next to a major collector road, which is Judd Road, which is, again, not the situation that we're faced with here tonight. The Platypus Daycare at Amblepath is perhaps closer, because that's also a small lot subdivision, which is a more dense form of a development. But as one speaker noted, that daycare was designed in. It's located at the entrance, and it's there from the outset. So you don't have to drive through the entire subdivision to get to it. I'm not familiar with the other examples. When I was considering this, I tried to think, what is zoning about? And for me, 2 of the main reasons are, one is to prevent a form of chaos with conflicting uses side by side. And the other is certainty for investors coming in, so they have some idea and some trust in what they might be getting for their money. And I think we have to remember that a home is probably the largest single investment for most Canadian families. Whoa, have we got YouTube on again? I'm getting You guys hear me? I'm getting all kinds of weird.
Think that you have to do the same thing that Councillor Stoner.
Okay.
Check out Banger, bag it up, bag it up. Holland's State of Mind is leading the limited discount collection. Get yours today. Get a free album download and flying offers right to your phone. Sets album to 3.
I don't know how that's happening. Okay, I'm back at it again. Sorry. Sorry.
So I think you have multiple windows open, Councillor Race, and one needs to be closed.
I'm not sure how I did that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll try and get through this. So this location is a small lot subdivision, and it's the proposed daycare would be at the end of a subdivision with a need to drive through, and we have really no guarantee of what route people might take. It's also a lot of approximately 7,000 square feet. It's in a built-up neighborhood, which means people bought there before this daycare was considered. And it's a relatively new neighborhood. I understand neighborhoods evolve over time and you might change zonings, but it's relatively recent. The building in there has been relatively recent. And so this is relatively new and perhaps a little early to change expectations. The concerns of the neighbors are similar to what we've heard in other places. You know, they find now the possibility of having a commercial activity close to their home. 8 children wasn't a problem, but 24 children is something different. The lot is about the same size as my lot, and I sit and think about the possibility of 24 children running around my lot, and no matter how much you like children, I think that would be a daunting prospect. It's actually similar to the concerns, some of the concerns we hear with Airbnbs, where people wake up one morning and find they've got a commercial activity next to them in a residential area. So having said that, I know there is a need for childcare facilities. I understand my fellow councillors' comments. I'm not debating that, but I don't think that's a license to do anything anywhere. You can ask what could be wrong with a daycare proposal, and I'd have to say that the location could be wrong, and I don't think this is a good location for it, so I will not be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Pettengill and Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for the feedback. There's been a lot of correspondence and a lot of, I think, well considered and well stated points given at the public hearing. A few thoughts and responding and sometimes repeating some of my fellow councillors. I think for me, one of the founding ideas with the direction we're going on the STR so far, this short-term rentals, and I have taken a bit of a different perspective on some of this, but it's the idea that housing is first, and our neighborhoods are first about housing an affordable, complete place to live, and not about investment first and foremost. And I think that piece is important here. And so for me, trying to protect neighborhoods as investments is a lower priority than making sure we have what people need to live affordably and well in their community. I did some of the concerns, as it was mentioned, there seems to be pretty much across the board a very high degree of admiration for the current operator, but concern about, well, what if someone else takes over? And it might not turn out so well. And those concerns did resonate with me, but I at the public hearing, staff answered a lot of my concerns about that. And so I feel like there are tools in place through the covenant and through our business business permitting to make sure that we can address those even with a new owner. When I listened, the number one concern that floated to the top for me was around safety and that was really tied to cars. And so for me, what I heard is the real concern about here is cars, and the solution for me is dealing with safety and vehicles and speeding and traffic, and not stopping a daycare. And I think we have a pilot project for speed reduction. This is, as was mentioned, a hot topic across the community. I think as we look through to climate action and pursuing active transit, this is something we just generally need to address. And I would rather address it that way than try and stop what seems to be a really good daycare. And so ultimately, I arrive at the conclusion that I think this is going to be a fantastic asset to this neighborhood. I would like to see this sort of thing in more neighborhoods. I think it adds a lot of value to neighborhoods. I think it's important to communities. I think it's a real opportunity when you have a neighborhood full of kids, something that brings your whole neighborhood together, because from what I've seen in my own neighborhood, people tend to look out for each other's kids and the kids that are around. And I think they bring a lot of care into a neighborhood. So on balance, I think this is a very strong proposal and one I'm happy to support.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I have read especially carefully, or tried to, through the traffic and safety concerns and plans and responses from our staff. As one of the presenters from the neighborhood has told us, and in encouraging a visit and a walkthrough, which I've done, every neighborhood is different. The traffic plan may see here 12 to 18 cars at staggered times, twice per day, drive by about 25 homes. I'm satisfied that staff have made maximum effort to arrive at a plan with minimum possible intrusiveness, and I don't think this is very easy. I don't see any other options for them to produce a plan to deliver this. Staff have spelled out at the various levels, or tactics, if you like, for enforcing this plan. I think this would be very important, not only the traffic, but of course the parking. And I'm satisfied that these have been good efforts that have been made. We are warned by members of the public that the demographics of this neighborhood and any neighborhood will change. And I agree, and I've seen this in my own. I've seen the generations of small children come and go. Very dramatic changes over time. The ownership of 39319 Falcon Crescent may also change. And I'm satisfied that we're prepared for this as we must with the proposed covenant, and that this should give us sufficient protection in that regard. I think it's necessary for us to test this project. I'm not as convinced as perhaps I've heard from the more recent comments from Councillor Pettingill. I think this is a test. I think we're going to learn from this, but I think we must work to meet the identified needs spelled out in the childcare action plan we received this spring. And while we may look for large-scale solutions in other kinds of neighborhoods, I think we are going to have to look at a variety of neighborhoods to play a role. And we will all learn here, and we have already learned some things to apply in subdivisions and neighborhood plans in future that we might have, in hindsight, have applied here. So I will be supporting the third reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson, Councillor French, and then Councillor Herford.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of those who contributed to the public hearing. I appreciate those who took the time to share their thoughts. And of course, it's more challenging than ever to share thoughts because of the pandemic restrictions we've got in place. So for those who made the effort, thank you. I've spoken previously about the concern that I have for commercialization of our neighborhoods in the context of short-term rentals. Now, this form of commercialization in neighborhoods I do support. I worked in an office next to a commercial daycare center at one time, and that experience was actually uplifting. Every day when the kids came outside into the play area, we could hear the sound of pure joy next door. So having walked Ravenswood and that neighborhood many times, I believe that the traffic management plan that's proposed for this facility will serve the neighborhood well. And there were two concerns that I heard over and over again that I really focused on. and they're concerns that don't worry me at all. First of all, real estate values. There's concern that the daycare center will bring down property value for the nearby homes. Well, I predict with confidence that any home near this center that is put up for sale in the future will sell for well above the previous purchase price. Proximity to daycare is a selling feature for many people. Future buyers at Ravenswood will pay a premium to have quality daycare right next door. So I believe this commercial operation will bring a net positive benefit to not just the neighborhood, but the entire community. Second, there was concerns about the neighborhood being flooded with cars. Well, Ravenswood has a significant child population, children that are in the daycare age, and many of the clients, I expect, and the precedent's already there, will either walk or cycle from their homes within Ravenswood or relatively close by. And I trust that those who will be driving to the daycare will be motivated to do so safely. I encourage Ravenwood's residents to monitor for traffic management compliance and then report concerns if there are any, and report those to the daycare operator and to the District of Squamish if it feels appropriate to do that. Just in closing, I'd again like to thank those who contributed to the public hearing. It really took something to do that. And I support early childhood education. I support the creation of much needed daycare spaces. I support this rezoning. Thank you.
Councillor French, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. The need for childcare in our community is real and causes all sorts of the lack of it causes all sorts of crisis in young families. And I'll be supporting this. I do think it's a great addition to the neighborhood. The neighborhood is still evolving as further east Cardinal Drive start to be finished off, and the traffic flows are going to evolve along with that. The proponent for a long time, as I hear the demand for childcare being so high, I've often been left scratching my head, wondering why that demand hasn't been filled by the market. And this proponent has found a way to do that, and has found a way to do that while integrating into a neighborhood. With the development that's happening in that area, I do predict over time, we're going to see the vast majority of the people attending this daycare to be from the neighborhood and getting there by other ways. I acknowledge the concerns of a lot of the speakers at the public hearing, and it felt like we were having a public hearing on traffic safety. We all agree that traffic safety is of the utmost importance for our friends and our family, and sadly for our pets as well, as we heard in one example there. To put those concerns onto the additional onto the operator and this use of that land, I don't think is entirely fair. There is going to be some traffic at 2 points in the day that is going to be held to a higher standard than I would say the rest of the neighborhood is. So I'm comfortable that with the tools we have in place, we will be able to monitor and enforce the plan. And I look forward to seeing these new spots come online, and we can continue to move forward with facilitating childcare throughout our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. Seeing no further hands, I will call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Councillor Race opposes. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful comments this evening. Okay, next up is our Emergency Operations Center update. Ms. Latimer is here with us, our Emergency Program Coordinator.
Oh, there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. I'm just going to share my screen. Just stand by 1 second. There we go. Okay, I'll just confirm that you can see my screen.
We can. There's some odd green dialog boxes.
Oh, yeah. Here, let me move that. There, is that better?
Thank you.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council. Apologies for the technical difficulties. It's been some time since I last spoke to you. I believe the last time was back during the shift from phase 2 to phase 3. And just for the record, I'm Megan Latimer, the Emergency Operations Coordinator Emergency Program Coordinator, and giving you a report tonight on what the Emergency Operations Center has been doing in terms of their district's response for the COVID-19 pandemic. And because it's been a little bit of time, I just wanted to start with a very brief update in terms of where we're at in the pandemic. I'm just going, there we go. There we go. So on the slide here, you'll see a snapshot from the BC CDC COVID-19 dashboard. And this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of where we're at right now today. Over the summer, we've seen a gradual increase in terms of the numbers of COVID-19 cases. They have been on the rise, in particular after long weekends where we're seeing gatherings of people at family events, barbecues, and things like that. And the number of new cases that we saw last week was a total of 789 new cases. And that was 120 new cases from the week before. So we are seeing quite a rise in recent weeks in terms of number of cases. That being said, I did want to point out a couple factors that are a little bit different from this period of the pandemic from where we were back in sort of the March through May period. One of the things I wanted to highlight is that the most likely source of an infection of COVID-19, it remains contact with a local case or cluster. So that's a little bit different from what we were seeing in the early days of the pandemic, where we had that widespread community transmission, and it was very difficult to contact trace and to understand where the sources of infection were coming from. The contact tracing network is much more robust today, and so it's been much easier to isolate cases very quickly and get them under control by the health authorities. The other thing that we're seeing that's a little bit different today is that the median age of people who are impacted by the pandemic has gone down. We were around 55 years old as the median age of people who were infected with COVID-19. We're now seeing that down around 39 years old. And that really gives us an indication of the nature of activities that are taking place and among which demographics, where we're seeing that bulge in terms of number of cases. And it's among younger people, and again, linked a lot to these sort of long weekend gatherings and events that we're seeing in different parts of the province. I'll just highlight 3 of the sort of key health indicators that we watch from the emergency operations side. So obviously we look at the number of new cases. So you can see there, I'll indicate with my arrow, that steady sort of increase that we've been seeing since around the July 1st long weekend. We've seen that rise every sort of 2 weeks, also the August long weekend. And I expect we'll continue to see a somewhat of a surge over the next couple of weeks, just with September, the Labor Day long weekend, as well as potentially the reopening of additional activities like going back to school, as well as community centers and other places. The other number that we watch is number of hospitalizations, and that's where we really see some more positive news about where we're at in terms of the pandemic. So with younger people, we are seeing much better resilience in terms of how they handled the disease. And so we're seeing lower number of hospitalizations. That being said, we are in the last couple of weeks, we're seeing that start to rise as well, which is very worrying. And then in terms of number of deaths, this is the other indicator that we watch quite closely from the EOC. And so that also has remained low. However, we do think that is linked to the demographic that is mostly impacted at the moment, and that's among the younger crowd, and they tend to have a higher survivability rate. One of the new products, I also want to draw your attention to that the health authorities have started to produce is cases by local health area. And this has been one of the challenges since the beginning of the pandemic, is getting information on more localized areas in terms of what the number of cases are in our community, and to really have that tactical information to be able to understand what's going on. We've sort of had to operate under the assumption that everybody has COVID and make decisions accordingly. And the BC CDC has started to produce this new resource for us, which is somewhat helpful. It is only as current as July 2020. They update on a monthly basis, so we are always sort of operating, looking behind. But it does give us an indication in terms of impact in which areas. And I'll just zoom in here so you can see we're part of the Howe Sound local health area, the District of Squamish. That also includes Whistler, Pemberton, and SLRD areas C and D. And so at the end of July, we were looking at a total of 19 cases between January and July 2020. So, I think that's quite interesting for the community to understand that number in relation to what we're seeing more in the Lower Mainland, where you have those higher densities of people. That number, I would expect, will have gone up over the last month through August. Hopefully, we'll see that reflected in a new map being released soon. Just so we have a better understanding of the situation, can continue to monitor that in terms of the impact in the community and that local health area. I did want to turn very quickly to the sort of known local incidents and clusters of cases that we've had in our community. So we do know, because those businesses have publicly announced it themselves, that there's been at least 2 local businesses that have been impacted and had some infections among staff, and both of those businesses, the cases there have been concluded, so people have recovered, and there's no further risk within those businesses. We're also seeing more recently the cluster of cases among Squamish Nation members. So most of that has been down in the sort of North and West Vancouver areas of Squamish Nation territory. We have seen some up in this region as well. That situation is ongoing. However, my understanding, speaking to our counterparts at the Squamish Nation Emergency Operations Center, is that the situation is well in hand. Over 2/3 of members who were impacted and infected by COVID-19 have now recovered, which is really fantastic news. And only about, I believe, 10 members remain in self-isolation and are continuing to be supported by the Squamish Nation Emergency Operations Center, as well as the team at Totem Hall for those who are within our community. I also want to take this opportunity just to mention that to date, we haven't seen any public exposures reported here in Squamish, and that's also some really good news. When we talk about public exposures, what that means is that when you're a close contact of a confirmed COVID-19 case, public health, they'll contact you to let you know. But in some cases where not everyone can be reached, the health authorities, they'll post that public exposure information online. And that website there is where people can go to see whether there's been public exposure events in the area. And the other thing that they list there is the exact dates and times of exposure. And so that can be, I think, really reassuring to people if they go there and see a place that they visited, and they can see whether they were actually there during those dates and times and whether there actually is a risk. And the health authorities do want us to underline that it is very low risk. The possible exposures that are listed on that site are there out of an abundance of caution. And if people were in any of those areas, they're asked to simply self-monitor themselves for symptoms. And if anything does come up, then they can call 811 or speak to their family physician for further instructions. And there's no risk to anybody who attends those locations outside of those specified dates and times. I wanted to give you a little update in terms of what the district's EOC has been doing over the last few months in terms of getting ready for the fall, where we do expect to see cases increase and probably decrease and increase again. We'll probably see that wave go up and down. There's a number of different initiatives that we've been working on from the Emergency Operations Center level, as well as with different departments within the district. We're currently in the process of finalizing several resources for staff and also specifically for managers to be able to manage and cope during the remainder of the pandemic. These include our pandemic response plan, which will outline the different roles and responsibilities of district staff, and in particular the Emergency Operations Center staff during a pandemic event. The other resource that we're putting together that should be done soon is the Business Continuity Playbook, which is going to provide a qualitative overview of the different service delivery models when the district is impacted by an event such as a pandemic or other types of events where we might have to close or restrict services. This planning is also looking at staff engagement as we move forward in this new normal that we're in, and looking at how we can best support staff and still be able to engage between staff and managers as we go forward in this virtual and sometimes in-person hybrid world that we're in. The third piece, and I think one of the most important, is the COVID-19 safety plans. So you'll have seen some of these. They were introduced for all facilities back at the beginning of phase 2 and phase 3. Our Human Resources Department has now brought on a new occupational health and safety advisor, and she has really been the driving force in terms of introducing a new employee safety plan. This will provide really clear guidance to staff on the updated district safety controls and procedures and protocols around COVID-19. Many of these resources are already available on our staff intranet site. And that site has now been updated with a number of additional resources and put together a new, more organized layout so that staff and council as well can easily connect with the information that they might need. I just want to underline before I move into some of the different support we're providing externally as the Emergency Operations Center, that all of those plans will really complement each other. And they're aiming to fulfill the objectives of keeping staff and the public safe, continuing to be able to deliver our municipal services, and supporting the ongoing response and recovery from the pandemic. We're going to provide council with a more detailed update on these plans and initiatives in early October once they're finalized and once we've received feedback from staff. We are doing a soft rollout of the employee safety plan, and so we expect to receive feedback and to be able to provide that to staff next week, I believe, is when it's planned to go out. When we look at what the Emergency Operations Center and DOS district departments have been doing to support the health emergency specifically, there's a few different examples I wanted to highlight. One of them is the support we've been providing to the Sea to Sky Division of Family Practice to set up the new COVID-19 Community Assessment Center at the former Shady Tree Pub location. We've been supporting them in a number of ways, providing signage, coordination with different agencies and organizations here in town, as well as communications and radio support for on-site. The other area we've been providing support to the health authorities is in planning for fall influenza vaccination campaigns. This will be extremely important this year. It's important every year, but in particular this year with the added burden of COVID-19 on the healthcare system and on people's health. The fall influenza vaccination campaign will really be a priority. And so we're helping them source different locations around the community that might be appropriate for that, and to make sure that the different groups, in particular high-risk groups, are able to access those vaccination services. The other area that there's been significant work done is through our communications team, and they've been integral throughout this entire response. in terms of providing concrete and clear messaging, both internally to staff as well as externally to the public. And I think that many people look to the district to weigh in on certain situations, provide guidance in terms of deciphering some of the more complicated health information and directives. And our communications team has done a great job on that, working with the Emergency Operations Center to get that messaging out. They focused a lot on targeting some of the long weekend traffic, so people who are recreating and visiting in Squamish, and encouraging them to do that safely, and really reinforcing the different practices for COVID-19 that can keep them safe. The other areas that they've focused on have been in terms of producing different staff resources. So as I mentioned before, the intranet site and a number of other resources for staff to make it very clear in terms of how to manage different aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And more recently, we're seeing a lot of effort on their part in terms of messaging and health messaging around the air quality issue that we've been experiencing the last week from the wildfire smoke down in the U.S., which we know is an added burden on people's health, in particular those who already have respiratory challenges. A very important role in terms of the public education and lead up towards that sort of worst case scenario of having to enforce a COVID-19 safe behavior violation. So we've seen augmented capacity being brought on board for bylaw in order to be able to support on that. Just very briefly, the coordination and information sharing around COVID-19 pandemic took a little bit of a hiatus, I would say, over the summer in terms of coordination calls and meetings on this specifically. A lot of monitoring was done, but there wasn't a lot of coordination calls and specific meetings happening. That is now restarted as of a couple weeks ago. So we're seeing weekly calls with Emergency Management BC and the health authorities. And we're also seeing regular updates to mayors and CAOs from Vancouver Coastal Health to give a more regional picture of what's going on. And we've also restarted our weekly Sea to Sky Emergency Program coordination calls with the other communities in the area. I wanted to highlight a few of the initiatives, this is certainly not all of them, in terms of planning and implementing recovery and adaptation, because this is another very important part of the efforts as we go forward in the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there was a huge success over the last couple of weeks with the reopening of two very important district facilities, both the library, which is reopened with limited hours, but is now accessible to the public, as well as Brennan Park Recreation Center, which opened last week with programming. And both of these places will look a little bit different and feel a little bit different when people visit them, but it's quite an accomplishment to have been able to reopen both these facilities with the constraints of the pandemic on top of us. The other area that we're really focusing on for planning in terms of recovery and adaptation is staff health, safety, and wellness. There's a lot of long-term planning going on there. As I mentioned before, there's a new occupational health and safety specialist in human resources who's looking at a lot of the policies and longer-term planning around that with the HR team. And there is also Keely Kidner is looking at staff engagement in our remote environment and how to improve that moving forward, and how we can create better safe meeting places to be able to still meet in person while maintaining safe practices in the COVID-19 environment. And then the other area is working with some of our external community partners and different organizations in the community and businesses as well to enhance public spaces and connect to different resources that are available to be able to do this. So there's quite a few conversations in place at the moment around the Canada Healthy Communities Initiative grant, which was recently announced. Economic development has also played a very strong role in terms of working with the Chamber of Commerce, local businesses, Tourism Squamish, in terms of connecting with resources and making sure that people have the information and resources that they need. So I'm going to leave off there and turn it over to Mayor and Council in case there are any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Latimer. That was a great presentation. Council, any questions of clarification? Councilor Pettengill.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering if locally or at the health region or provincial level, has anyone set thresholds? So if there's more than X number of cases within 3 days or whatever, we just automatically move to a more conservative phase or stage, or are we just sort of constantly evaluating and seeing where we are?
Through the mayor, it's a really, really good question. That's one of the factors that the health authorities look at from the provincial level in terms of how we move between those phases. I understand there's a number of other factors as well, in particular looking at the nature of transmission and whether it's clusters of cases as opposed to community transmission. So I don't know if there's a specific figure that or a specific number that triggers us from one phase to the next. I think there's a number of other factors that weigh in there. That certainly would be probably one of the more important ones. But I think also looking at the number of hospitalizations and that impact on the healthcare system is another one that that really influences that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, and I agree. It was a fantastic update. Thank you for that. I think it was really timely as well, based on kind of the changes that we're seeing across the province. And so thanks for being here. And I hope that a little bit of a quieter summer meant that you got a little bit of a break. I'm sorry if I missed this in your presentation, and/or it's probably something that I should know. But is the Emergency Operations Center technically active at this point, or is this work that you're just kind of doing as incorporated into day-to-day, or we still have an active EOC?
Through the mayor, we do technically still have an active EOC. We're operating at a level 1, which is sort of the lowest level and with minimal staffing. And really a lot of this work is being done through the emergency program, then reaching out to other departments and working through the corporate structure. However, for decisions, we are still going through our EOC director, which is Linda Glenday. And this also does allow us, should there be things that come up, to access funding through the provincial government as well for emergency response.
Thank you. Anything else from council? I appreciate you spending time with us this evening, Ms. Latimer. I think it's really important for council to sort of be able to see behind the EOC and what's been going on and get a glimpse into that, as well as our community. I think that I think what's reflected out to the community is a really well-oiled machine and a lot of collaboration that's happened not only within City Hall and all the departments here, but also with our partners across the community. So I would just say thank you for all the effort you've put into this. And I feel like I sleep better at night knowing that that you're on top of this and that we've got a really solid plan going into the fall. And I know people are nervous about the fall. So certainly gives me confidence to have this presentation tonight and know that we're prepared no matter what comes our way. So thank you.
Thank you.
So where are we now? We're on to our consent agenda. So if there's anything you're in conflict with on this or anything you need to pull, now's the time to do it. I'm pulling letter 5 before Councillor Pettengill does. So, Councillor French?
Yeah, I'd like to pull letter number 7, please.
Okay. Councillor Anderson?
I'd like to pull the staff update report, please, from Economic Development.
Okay. Motion to approve the consent agenda with those items pulled. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Under correspondence, action requested. The first is that correspondence regarding the 55 Activity Center be referred to the General Manager of Community Services for a follow-up and response. We received a number of items under that, so those would go to Ms. Goldbeck for response. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have a letter from Dr. Lefishin, and he is our Deputy Chief Medical Health Officer for Vancouver Coastal Health, and this is a letter we received about a project that Vancouver Coastal Health is working on around climate change and health vulnerabilities, which is really interesting. At the end of the letter, there's an invitation to contact BCH if we'd be interested in participating in a climate change and health engagement session. So, for our consideration, Councillor Stoner.
Just generally, I did click through and go scroll through the webpage, and it is extremely interesting information. I personally would be interested in participating, but there was also one piece that I found at the end that we can also request a community summary that will give us our community profile for each of the 4 climate hazards. So I would also like to see that come forward.
All right. Do you want to try and shape that into a resolution, and probably also refer this to our Manager of Climate Change and Sustainability?
Yes. So I will move that we reach out to, that the mayor reach out to Craig Brown requesting.
Just to staff, actually.
Just to staff?
Yeah.
So I will move that staff reach out to Craig Brown requesting both community summaries of the 4 climate hazards, as well as, so I'm just trying to find the language here from which the option is, as well as articulating our interest in participating in a climate change and health engagement session, as well, and that the letter be forwarded to our Director of Sustainability and Climate Change. 2 motions.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Pettengill. Any other comments?
I will type it out for the note taker, in case they didn't capture it all.
That's Chayton. She's taking minutes tonight. Councillor Pettengill.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to support this. I actually looked at the attachments before the resolution and thought it was fantastic, and was frustrated that I couldn't find Squamish's numbers. And then I went back and saw that we're invited to participate. So I think this is really important, just because I think the data is useful, but it speaks not just to climate, but also equity, which is something else we are talking about and very important. And I do think with COVID, which we just had a report about, you know, I think it is going to be challenging for a lot of people to think about where we're spending our money and how can we justify some of our spending. And I think this will provide really important context of why we still need to be paying attention to serious climate action while we're dealing with COVID and some of the other challenges before us. So I think this is to help our community understand where we are too in the decisions we're making. This is really critical information.
Thank you. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. I'm just going to look to our corporate officer. We pulled 2 letters, but then we pulled a staff report. So does the staff report go under business arising? Or I'm going to deal with the correspondence that was pulled now.
Normally, if it's pulled, if there's a conversation or discussion that's going to happen, it gets referred to a committee of the whole for discussion.
Okay, so Councillor Anderson need to make that motion then at some point. Where would he do that? Under business arising, or?
I do it after the items of correspondence.
Okay, I'll do that. I pulled letter 5, Aroha Miller, about the release of the new Ocean Watch edition. I actually have a hard copy. and several executive summaries that I will put in my office, and council is welcome to grab them. And I meant to bring them today and forgot, but they will be there. It's a fantastic report. With his hat on as a Quest professor, our manager of climate change and sustainability had a hand in writing some of the reports. It's very focused on climate this time around. So well worth the read. It's pretty thick. So the executive summary is very thin. So you can choose what you'd like to read, but they'll be in my office for council or staff. So motion to receive that letter from Aroha Miller. I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor French, you pulled the letter about the top of Perth.
Yes, I'm pulling this letter to highlight the loss of enjoyment the residents at the top of Perth are suffering. This weekend, I got a note indicating that one of the residents was gardening and overheard a group of people speaking disparagingly about them based on the belief that they played a key role in changing the parking situation up there. And I just can't imagine being in one's own front yard, pulling some weeds and listening to people complain that I forced them to parallel park instead of angle park. I regularly get correspondence about the issues that range from noise, speeding, road obstruction, off-leash dogs, and waste management at the top of Perth Drive. So I just wanted to highlight all that and simply will move to receive and file the letter.
Thank you. I'll second that. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Anderson, your option really here is to refer it.
Yes, I will move to have this report, the future methodologies and approaches for sector impact studies, referred to a future committee of the whole meeting. I can speak to it briefly if there's a seconder.
Seconded by Councillor French. Go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Very good. We have here another important, dense Economic Development Department report, and I believe it contains very valuable and interesting information and perspectives. It belongs to a bigger picture, and I think it deserves some council discussion time. It poses certain issues. I'll just highlight a couple of them. How do we define geographic study areas for some of these economic sectors, and what are the implications for that for what we're trying to achieve? How do we define a sector comes up a couple of times for a couple of them. Economic development is recommending that we return after each few years in this data gathering exercise, and that is something that perhaps we might give some thought to, some discussion time to. But most importantly, I think there's going to be some tough choices in what to emphasize with the different types of analysis for a given sector. There's going to be budget constraints and competing priorities. So I just think that it would be very valuable and useful that we give at least some committee of the whole time to a review of this report with Kate Mulligan and her team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. If there's no further comments, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Oh, I did. Thank you. We missed letter 13A3 from M. Fitchell regarding traffic target areas, that this be referred to the Director of Engineering for follow-up. That's moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for catching that. We are on to item 10A. Cancellation of regular business meetings for the month of October, that these meetings be canceled and that special meetings be scheduled as required in October. This allows us to meet electronically during the pandemic. That is moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. Councillor French, do you have a question? No, you're just seconding that. Thank you. All those in favor and opposed, motion carries. Next up, 10B1, under Community Planning and Infrastructure, we are going to be looking at Pioneer Way Upgrade Phase 1 Contract Award.
Chair?
Yes.
I'm still getting this odd noise, so I'm going to, just so you know, I'm going to exit the meeting and then come back in, just reboot it.
Thank you, Councillor Race.
All right, are you able to hear me? Was that a yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
This is Chris Wickham. I'm the Director of Engineering. I'm on audio only due to some technical difficulties, but this is a verbal only update or request for motions, so that should be okay. So the engineering department is seeking council's authorization to award the contract for the Pioneer Way upgrade phase 1 to Whistler Excavation in the amount of $919,919.62 plus 15% contingency. This work follows the guidelines of the District Active Transportation Plan and Multimodal Transportation Study, which proposes an extension of Pioneer Way from Queensway to the intersection of Government Road and Centennial Road, complete with 2 lanes, curbs, sidewalks, and multi-use path. This road upgrade will eventually serve as a major entry into the business park from the north side of Squamish and ultimately remove traffic from the residential area of Government Road. This project will also see the upgrade of Discovery Active Transportation Trail to Government Road and east-west link from the Discovery Trail to the Mud Zone in the Industrial Park. The project is broken up into 3 phases, which is shown in your council report. With this contract award being for phase 1, which is just a section from Queensway up to Discovery Way. Phase 2 is proposed for 2021 in the upcoming budget, so we'll be talking about that during the budget process. And phase 3 has some more complicated land issues, so we haven't designated which year that will be, but in upcoming years, not too far in the future. This phase of Pioneer Way Extension project includes the construction of the road, including the sub-base and the paved roadway, multi-use path on the south side, and which will eventually connect up to Discovery Trail once we finish phase 2. Also storm infrastructure, including curb and gutter and lighting, and the basic infrastructure for eventual lights at Queensway and Pioneer Way, although that's, the lights themselves won't go in until we connect all the way up in phase 3. The one thing that is not included is frontage along the north side, and that's because those lots are not developed yet, and we didn't want to lock the developers into what the frontage is going to look like. So we've left just the curb there, and the frontage will go in during the development. The project is fully funded from the 2020 budget and is below the within the budget amount. We put the RFQ out on BC bid as per the district purchasing policy. We received 3 competitive bids. The lowest bid was Whistler Excavation, which we are proposing to award this contract to. And I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wickham, and great to hear the little humans in your life joining in on our meeting tonight. And please don't feel bad about that. That is the realities of where we're at in these days and times. So thank you.
And it's bedtime. They're all in their PJs and ready to go.
Awesome. So we have a couple of questions. The first from Councillor French and then Councillor Pettengill.
Great, thank you. So I'm a little bit focused on intersections, Pioneer Way, Queensway, and wondering if a traffic circle has been considered for Pioneer and Queens.
I believe the issue, we did look at both the intersections of the eventual north intersection and the south intersection, and I believe the issue in the south intersection is space. I'm not sure about that answer though. Eventually we settled on a light for that intersection.
Okay, and then somewhat related, I see that with the signalization that's planned for Pioneer and Queensway, it gets me thinking about the next intersection to the south at Commercial and Queensway, an intersection that is quite problematic with all of the turning motions that are possible there. I have seen near misses and crashes. So,
Councillor French, you're a bit off topic.
Okay, very good. I'll leave it. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe my question will put some kids to sleep. Just wondering, you mentioned that we're not locking the developers or potential developers of the properties to the north into frontages, but I'm just wondering, what is the risk of us doing this work and then something development there happens where they have to tear up a bunch of what we've done, or would that just encroach possibly into frontages and the bulk of this work would be sort of not need to be redone?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're trying to obviously activate a significant area of potential employment land there to the north, we are putting in the water, sewer, and storm infrastructure that would be required for really any conceivable development that goes in there. So we're not going to have to tear up and upsize the water or anything like that. As far as, so really, they'll be operating on their property. And so we don't know where they're going to want to put entrances or what sort of landscaping they'll want to have or anything like that. So in that sense, we don't want to tie them down on their property line or within our roadway in that sort of frontage area. But once we get to the actual curb line and the street itself, the only thing we'll probably have to jackhammer is a little bit of the curb. And that's why we're leaving that north side largely undeveloped.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, does someone want to move the motion? Councillor Stoner, thank you. I'll second that. I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Mr. Wickham. We're now on to the approval of minutes. We have, first one is a recommendation from Committee of the Whole from September 1st. That Committee of the Whole meetings will be limited to electronic participation only until further notice, and that staff investigate opportunities to screen Committee of the Whole meetings for the public to attend. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And another recommendation from Committee of the Whole on September 8th that Council received the report from Community Planning on the proposed business park zoning update, and that staff draft zoning amendments to be included in stage 2 of the 2020 zoning bylaw update based on the feedback received at that Committee of the Whole. I will move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Yes.
Did you miss the motion that communication staff review opportunities to restart Council Pro?
I'm tired.
It's a long day, yes.
We're going back to the recommendations from Committee of the Whole, September 1. The communication staff review opportunities to restart Council Coffee Crawl in a physically distanced and safe manner. Moved by Councillor Pettengill, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none. Any council or staff in-camera announcements? None this evening. Open question period. Is there anyone on the line that wants to ask a question? Council or staff announcements? Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, just I've mentioned before, I've been participating in a reading group which started at the Squamish Library, and Rachel Berquist has continued this on, leading this. And a couple things have come out of this, and I just want to make sure that if anyone else is interested in joining, just send me an email. I think we'd love to have more participants. We started with 21 things you may not know about the Indian Act by Bob Joseph, and we are now working through Indigenous relations, insights, tips, and suggestions to make reconciliation a reality. Those of us that are involved have pretty busy lives, so we're doing like a chapter or 2 a week, so less than 20 pages of reading, so it's very manageable, and there's a fairly tight but excellent 1-hour discussion once a week, so well worthwhile. And some people can't make every meeting, and that's fine. And Whistler Library is also participating in this, and they are lining up a speaking event with Bob Joseph himself. So there'll be that opportunity to speak with him. And these are excellent books that are very topical for us. So just again, encourage anyone who else is interested, let me know and I will connect you with the group.
Thank you very much, Councilor Pettengill. There's drop-in with the mayor tomorrow. Taking in feedback from my last drop-in with the mayor, we are doing this one a little bit after hours. So we're starting at 4:30 and going to 6. And that's at the OCM Pavilion. And council, if you're missing members of the public, feel free to come on down too. It'll be outside and socially distant. I think that's all I have. It is late, so I'm just going to ask for a motion to terminate. Moved by Councilor French, seconded by Councilor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.